But liberals today are virtue signaling. They're not doing good deeds. And they want to punish people. They want to restrict speech. Their entire agenda is to get people fired for the slip of a tongue, and it makes me sick.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report. Hang with us, guys. Thank you so much for your support. And I want to let you know this video is brought to you in part by the Patriot Flashlight. It's solar powered by the sun, so you won't need to waste any more money on batteries. The Patriot Flashlight has a life-saving emergency strobe along with 4 other unique lighting modes, and you can charge your phone anywhere because it has this handy USB port. Other features include a compass, rope, and wire cutter, and a glass-breaking hammer, which comes in handy should you ever find yourself in an emergency in your car and you need to get out. And the Patriot Flashlight is obviously a perfect gift, so pick one up while supplies last. You can use promo code SGT20 to save 20% off. It's the best flashlight on the market. I'll leave the link below this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's wonderful to have you back, and it's great to have back on my friend and author, Donald Jeffries. You guys know him because you probably bought many of his books. You've supported him. He's been on the broadcast several times before. And just to give a little history, guys, Donald Jeffries has written some very important books, including 2014's Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics, and of course, the 2017 book, Survival of the Richest, how the corruption of the marketplace and the disparity of wealth created the greatest conspiracy of all, a word we can't use on YouTube anymore. And we have Donald back with his new book, the 2019 tome, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, the history they didn't teach you in school. And guys, this one has a foreword written by the one and only Ron Paul. What a book. Donald just sent it to me. Donald Jeffries, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sean. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. You dedicated this book to your son, John, and I'm going to just jump ahead to the introduction with this quote from Gore Vidal, which I think really sums it up. This is what we are. He says, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy analyst." This important book is one everybody should get for their library because you really break down the real history prior to everything that happened to the assassination of JFK. I know your area of study for so long. You really got your feet wet with the JFK assassination and that kind of research. But boy, the hidden history, the real history of this world and how the powers that be have tried to usurp our sovereignty and our Constitution and everything the Founding Fathers gave us, that's the story that needs to be told as well. And that's all in this book. Take
Absolutely.
it away.
And absolutely. I'm a populist, but I'm a patriot, but I'm the kind of patriot when patriotism meant something different. I revere the Founding Fathers, and Thomas Jefferson is my all-time hero. I still get goosebumps when I read the Declaration of Independence, when I look at the Constitution, and that may be naive, especially for someone as cynical as me, but I think it was the greatest form of government, as perfect as possible, because you give authority to man and power corrupts, and the separation of powers, where they had 3 equal branches of the government, and it was set out that way. And for a long time, until 1861, basically, it pretty much remained within that constitutional framework. For the 15 presidents prior to Abraham Lincoln, except for James K. Polk, who ventured into Mexico, an unwise war there that Lincoln himself, as a member of Congress, opposed, rightly, they tended to stay within their constitutional boundaries, and they understood that there were 3 separate and equal branches of government. Under Abraham Lincoln, all that was shattered forever. And we saw the first imperial presidency. We saw tyranny on an unparalleled scale. We saw newspapers shut down, hundreds of newspapers, thousands of Americans in the North thrown into makeshift prisons just for opposing his policies. And we've never recovered from that. We've never recovered from that. And most people don't realize before the Civil War, the United States was considered plural. After the Civil War, it has forevermore been singular. The United States is. Because we became under the yoke of that all-encompassing federal government, which grew tremendously under Lincoln and just continued to grow afterwards. And we've never looked back. We're not the same country. And I think even a lot of the division you see today in this country along cultural lines breaks down somewhat under the lines of the division that were in the country at that time. Because the Founding Fathers, I believe, the 2 most important concepts that our form of government, our constitutional republic, gave to the world were, 1, most importantly, the consent of the governed, where people everywhere have a right to consent to those who are governing them. They shouldn't be governed by those they don't consent to. Well, that was shattered forever under Abraham Lincoln, because the southern states, think of them what you may, they were doing the exact same thing the American colonies were doing when they tried to secede, to revolt from British rule. Well, once Lincoln and the American government said, no, you can't do that, we no longer had the consent of the governed. And the other important concept under our founders, written by James Otis, one of the many forgotten founders who I talk about in the book, is that there's no taxation without representation. That was the primary impetus for the revolution. Can anyone looking at today think that we have any representation by our political leaders? We certainly have taxation. So the cherished concepts of the movement to become an independent country have been shattered since the Civil War, and who knows when the taxation without representation. But it's been certainly since then, or most of the 20th century, we did not have any kind of representation. We had a brief shining moment there under JFK, where an outsider got in, and we saw what happened to him. And so I think that when we don't even sell, and that's why I talk about how Hollywood there's never been a movie. And I'm a big movie buff. Believe me, I know film inside out. I'm writing a book about show business now. But there's never been a film about George Washington. There's never been a film about Thomas Jefferson. And even back in the patriotic era of the 30s and 40s, when there was a lot of flag waving going on, how come there was no movie about George Washington? Well, because if you have his life, or Thomas Jefferson's life especially, you kind of have to include the things he said and wrote. You have to at least touch on George Washington's farewell address. George Washington's farewell address, it can't be taught in the schools because it contradicts the foreign policy of the United States under both Republicans and Democrats for my entire lifetime. That bipartisan foreign policy, which George Washington talked about, no entangling foreign alliances, harmonious relations with all. John Quincy Adams went even further and said, America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Well, that is all America does and has been doing for 50 years or so, especially since the 90s or so. So I think that people, when we look at, we have an interesting dichotomy here, because we still have, on paper, they pay lip service to the Constitution. Our representatives actually swear allegiance to it. I wonder if they don't burst into flames doing it. But they obviously don't pay any attention to it. And the Constitution has been ripped to shreds. When you can have a talking head like Chris Cuomo talk recently on air, where he just mentioned hate speech and how people need to read the Constitution. This guy's a lawyer too. And he said the free speech doesn't cover hate speech. The word hate doesn't appear in the Constitution, let alone the Bill of Rights. So this is the problem. We have people leading us who don't even pretend. They still use the name Constitution, but they're not. Ever since John Marshall usurped his role in the Supreme Court's role in the judiciary and began interpreting the Constitution, which Thomas Jefferson warned against that was not their role, to Abraham Lincoln and the imperial presidency. And the legislative branch has always been a third sister here ever since then. And they are the closest to the people. Theoretically, we can overturn them or at least a big portion of them every 2 years. We don't. We reelect 96% of them on average, or for some bizarre reason. But we don't have that checks and balances anymore. We typically have an imperial presidency. In this case, we have a president now who is accused of being a dictator and accused of being an imperial president, and he's hardly that, as we saw just with the Iran thing, where he is being counseled to do one thing and his instincts take him another direction, and luckily his instincts appear to have won out here. But he's not issuing executive orders that he should and can issue. The president that we've had under Franklin Roosevelt, who issued hundreds of these executive orders, and people like Woodrow Wilson, even to Obama, who've been active as presidents. But we have a legislative branch that has not fully functioned properly since that Civil War era, when they did not try to rein Abraham Lincoln in at all, when he violated one constitutional precept after another. And I think that this book is important because readers, you have to understand, as Santayana said, those who don't understand history are condemned to repeat it. And as Orwell said, who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past. The past is very important. Oliver Stone said at the beginning of JFK, the great film, the past is prologue. So what happened, believe it or not, what happened in the 1860s, we still feel the effect of today. And certainly what happened in the 1770s, we would feel the effect of it, but unfortunately it's been obliterated, and there are so few people out there that are saying the things I'm saying, that are talking about, Thomas Jefferson, that was anything but a racist. He was the most enlightened man of his age. And we ought to be looking at the things he said and the things he wrote and the things that others like George Mason and Patrick Henry, incredible, greatest generation if there ever was one. Those are the people we should be looking to for guidance, not Abraham Lincoln, who most people don't know hated the founding fathers and especially despised Thomas Jefferson. And those founders, just consider this, 90 years after the founding, in the 1860s, virtually every one of them, other than Alexander Hamilton, who has now become a black Broadway hip star because he was the banker's favorite. He was a father of debt. So he was different than the other founders, but all the other founders, I think they all would have been on the side of the South. They would have been for the right to secede during the Civil War. So that tells you something about our history. It's kind of hard to couple them together because they really were on the other side. And I think that explains why the media pays so little attention to that era. When Mel Gibson made the movie The Patriot, if you remember, back in, I guess, the late 90s, he caught a lot of flack just for presenting the British as the enemy, which they were at that time. And he just for touching on that subject because people really hadn't done that. And I think we need to stress more, but I understand from the people that rule us now why they don't want to go into that, because to hear all this talk about overthrowing tyranny, and you read the Declaration of Independence, a series of tyrannical acts, usurpations and acts, which explains it's nothing. It's what Walker was doing compared to what the tyranny we've been living under. So for the people to see that and realize, wait a minute, the Jeffersons, any people that have a right to alter or abolish the government whenever they so choose, and just the concept of the consent of the governed is something so important, but we don't hear it talked about, and they just stay away from that era because it's impossible to cover adequately the founding of this country without talking about overthrowing tyranny. And I guess they don't want the people to get any ideas.
No, that's 100% right. Let's just touch on a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned Trump not being an imperial president. I want to just back you up as it relates to Iran. And of course, we hear the war drums beating to attack Iran because of the ship in the Gulf of Oman, the shipping attack evidently being blamed on Iran with all the proof in the world, according to Adam Schiff. We've got this article from Zero Hedge here on June 21st. We were cocked and loaded. Trump explains why he called off Iran strikes in the last moment. He said, I'm in no hurry. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it. 150 dead Iranians is not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. So the man does still think for himself, and he does exercise his control as the executive in chief. And we're very blessed to have him in the White House because Hillary Clinton would have gleefully attacked Iran long before now, yeah. I'm sure. Probably Russia too. So, and I want to circle back to this idea of hate speech. You mentioned Chris Cuomo. You guys may recall Chris Cuomo telling us when the Podesta emails and the DNC emails were leaked, he said, it's illegal for you, the American public, to read these. It's our job to read them and then share those with you. And Chris Cuomo, of course, I believe is a red coat. That's a term that may resonate with you, Donald, knowing the true history of this country, as is Anderson Cooper, as is Wolf Blitzer, as is Chris Cuomo's, I believe it's his brother, the governor in New York, who was joyfully signed into law the abortion on demand in the 9th month bill.
We do the budget in April. I will not pass a budget until the Reproductive Health Act and the Contraceptive Care Act are passed, period.
And all the Democrats celebrated. So what we're up against in this country, at this point, I've compared it several times now in past interviews, Donald, we're up against the same type of the madness of the crowds that Pontius Pilate was up against when he went out to the crowd and he presented Barabbas and Jesus and said, take your pick. People like Chris Cuomo are so disingenuous that it absolutely defies belief. Like, they don't want people to read the Constitution. And I would imagine as Google changes their algorithms to filter out what they call disinformation or misinformation, it will be harder and harder to find the Constitution so you can read these lines. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are endowed by their Creator, not a government, with certain unalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The only reason we resort to government at all, Thomas Jefferson said, Donald, is to secure our rights, not take them away. And what we see big social media doing with the help of their mockingbird puppets like Chris Cuomo is to try to label everything that we talk about, discourse, as hate speech. You're right. It's not in the Constitution. There's no such thing as hate speech. There is only speech, and it is protected.
Right. Well, I mean, hate speech, the concept of hate speech contradicts free speech because hate is in the eye of the beholder. And I try to drum this point, but whenever I hear, because it comes up constantly, especially on the left. And remember, theoretically, I'm on the left. And I was talking to Sarah Westall in an interview earlier this week, and she said, you're really a far left-wing populist, but you sound like a white nationalist half the time. And I do. And it's because the left has left me. Thomas Jefferson is my hero. He was a classical liberal. Today, he would be considered a right-wing extremist and be lucky not to be imprisoned for his beliefs. But he was, at the time, the most enlightened man at the time, a classical liberal. Liberals like myself, we believe in reforming wrong. We believe in doing good deeds. And maybe it's the Catholic in me. But liberals today are virtue signaling. They're not doing good deeds. And they want to punish people. They want to restrict speech. Their entire agenda is to get people fired for the slip of a tongue, and it makes me sick to see the way they act. And as a civil libertarian, I'm also a civil libertarian, and there are almost no civil libertarian left, like my hero Mark Lane, who was a civil libertarian and got me started down this road. Not sure it's a good thing or not, but where I am today, starting with the JFK assassination, but. Civil libertarians, one of the things that's also been forgotten about the founders, that great expression that was first uttered by Voltaire, and Patrick Henry put it into more acceptable American terms when he said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to my dying day your right to say it. Now, even when I was a little kid, I learned that in school. And as a little child, that thrilled me. As someone who really wasn't sophisticated to even understand, because I thought, that's kind of like the golden rule type of, but people don't believe in it. Most Christians don't believe in the golden rule. Most people want to shut down the people they disagree with. And that's the idea of the civil libertarian, is that, hey, you have a right to say what you say. And, I obviously not going to agree with it. I can criticize it, but you don't impose your will on others. And that's where we are today, where the Chris Cuomos of the world certainly or want to impose their will on others. And I saw even today, leftists I admire on Facebook still giddy about Alex Jones being, deplatformed and stuff. And regardless what you think of Alex Jones, it's that, why do you revel in censorship, but liberals today revel in it? They want people taken off the air. They want people shut up and censored. They want these empty apologies. And I think the first thing that Trump really appealed to people on is he was the first white male in a public position of prominence almost in my lifetime that didn't necessarily apologize for making controversial remarks. And when controversial means basically
telling the truth.
The
truth is now controversial.
Exactly, it is. And just going against political correctness. But just not doing that was a sin in their eyes. And I think they've never forgiven him for that. Because when he didn't necessarily do what all these other leaders do. And I was actually surprised. I mean, I'm certainly no admirer of Joe Biden, but it's hilarious when you see all the other candidates trying to pile on him and now call him a racist. I mean, if you're familiar with that, Biden has been in the Senate a long time, like a lot of these career politicians. Of course, he caucused with a few of the last remaining segregationist senators from the Democratic Party in the South. The fact that he mentioned them, that he worked with them, has now caused him to be called a racist. I mean, could anything be more ridiculous than that?
Well, I'll tell you something more ridiculous than that. A couple things here. Let me just jump in because you mentioned Biden. We talk about the Mockingbird mainstream media propping up the Democrats, propping up those that would rather tear down the Constitution, those that revel in Alex Jones being deplatformed. You said that. We're hearing from Google and YouTube. We're hearing that what they want, we're hearing it from the Mockingbird mainstream media. As Google changes its algorithms, they want to propel what they call more authoritative sources.
YouTube has the scale of the entire internet, and I think we are making a lot of progress. But the thing we are trying to do is to bring more authoritative sources and fact checks on videos which may be controversial. It's a case where we got it wrong, but that's what we are trying to do, and we are working hard to improve.
To me, I immediately think of authoritarian sources. And that's what these leftists are. They're authoritarians. They want to tear up the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and replace it with their rule of law, the rule of man. That's why they're so damn corrupt. And that's why so many people, 70,000 people show up to see Trump at a rally. There's only 20,000 seats. So we're told by this mainstream Mockingbird lying whore media that Trump doesn't stand a chance in the election. Did you see these Quinnipiac polls? Yeah. Bernie Sanders over President Trump, 51 to 42%, according to this poll. Kamala Harris, 49 to 41% over Trump. Elizabeth Warren, who no one likes, and she's a proven liar. What,
Yeah.
fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent American Indian? What a joke. 49 to 42% over Trump. Pete Buttigieg, I can't even say his name. Nobody knows who he is. The mayor, 47 to 42% over Trump.
Yeah.
And Cory Booker, 47 to 42% over Trump. I mean, and of course, Trump tweeted about this, fake polls. It's so easy to fudge a poll. I mean, they probably just polled liberal Democrats, and a very small sampling at that, but they're not going to tell you that much. Donald Trump will, though.
Yeah, and it's so obvious, and I think that the greatest benefit, and I've been more disappointed with Trump than I'm sure you and your audience have. I wish he had been doing more, especially on immigration. But the impact he's had that has been undeniable is that just by his presence there and that lightning rod that he serves at, he has brought the roaches out in the light. He has really exposed what we, unfortunately, the enemies of liberty, and that's a huge portion of this country right now, are enemies of liberty, of any kind of concept of what this country was founded on, because they don't believe in free speech. They don't believe in the Bill of Rights. If you believe in hate speech, you don't believe in the Bill of Rights, period. And unfortunately, there's a huge percentage of Americans that feel that way now, people that want to have no boundaries, no borders at all. But Trump has served to whatever else, even not if he hasn't done anything, just by the fact he's there and serving as this kind of whipping boy he brings them out into the light, and you can see how deranged they are. When you watch some of these people on the media that just react to often just things he said on Twitter, and they are just they look like they belong in a padded room.
Yeah.
And you didn't see that before because they didn't have anybody like Trump that was in a position to be saying these things all the time. So it's I hope that more and more people, regardless what you think of Trump, realize how bad that other side is.
Well, and let me just jump in and say, because look, what you can see going on right now, because they don't have any ammo left, right? The Russiagate thing is a fable. They've got nothing on this president. They even illegally wiretapped him to try to find something on him. They've got nothing on him. They can't bring him down. So now they're talking about him being mentally unfit for the presidency. So you mentioned derangement. You're right. Many of these people on the left are deranged, uninformed. They've sold themselves out. They're going to speak the talking points they're sold to speak. That they're told to speak, especially at the DNC, these Democrats. But it gets even worse. Let's talk about the deep state. Phil Mudd, this former CIA agent, current CIA agent, I'm not sure, but Phil Mudd is constantly on CNN talking down this president, saying he's unfit for the presidency, saying he's mentally unfit, talking about the, what would it be, the 25th Amendment to bring down?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, using the 25th Amendment to get rid of this president because he's unfit for the office. I mean, these people will stop at nothing. And I guess at the end of the day, we can thank our lucky stars that AG Barr is in there, and that it appears to me that this president has teeth, he has fangs, and he's going to come for these people, hopefully with the rule of law, hopefully with grand jury indictments, hopefully with imprisonment, especially those that have committed sedition and treason. What do you think?
Well, I hope he does. And again, a lot of us out there have been waiting for that, because I think symbolically having some of these real deep state creatures, and because so like Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi and Paul Manafort, persecuted by an out of control, again, deranged left. I mean, they've not committed any kind of crime, certainly nothing that belongs with a prison sentence. But to see the Hillary Clintons of the world, people, the real deep state criminals, the Podestas, to have them investigated for what their really depraved things those emails may really reveal. The people who killed Seth Rich, that kind of, to see that kind of, I've likened this to a real domino theory, unlike the fake communist domino theory that was back in the Cold War era. A real domino theory would be, let's say, something like the murder of Seth Rich. If you just expose the truth about that, if that gets revealed, how many other dominoes fall because of that? Anything. I mean, you go back to the JFK assassination. I talked just that alone will reveal some dominoes. But certainly, the closer we come to things like the Seth Rich murder, the more recent history, that would be more significant, because then it exposes the next crime and the next crime, and that's what the domino theory is all about. So, if some of these things can actually get done, but unfortunately, after how obvious you make it, that segment of the public, and I don't know if they're lost forever or not. But a lot of these people were good people before Trump, and they have Trump derangement syndrome. And if there is such a thing as mental illness, that Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing, because they have lost their collective minds.
Yeah.
And I keep saying, look, you're basically just, you're upset at his personality. And you want him to go away, so you think you can impeach him because of that, just because his personality offends you. And I really think what offends them is that outspoken old white male. That's what they hate, because they don't want that anymore. And that's probably why they probably aren't happy that Biden is an alleged front runner, even in their party, even though he says all the things they say. He is an old white male.
But let me ask you something. Here's the thing, and I think this is why people are waking up in droves. People even on the left have walked away from the Democratic Party because they saw the corruption at the DNC. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to step down after trying to rig the primary for Hillary over Bernie. And people are so sick and tired of the corruption and the doublespeak and the disingenuous hyperbole coming from the left, because they don't seem to give a damn about this country or the Constitution, that brings us full circle, or the Bill of Rights. We only resort to government to secure our rights. And these people don't give a damn about our property. They don't even give a damn about our children. They don't give a damn about the unborn, Donald. At the end of the day, this is spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual conversation.
And really, the only thing that is
sold out.
Yeah, they certainly sold out to a dark force. And the only thing that is holding even a semblance of stability in this country is that what's left of that Constitution. But as you pointed out, like, for instance, they used to be talk of a new constitutional convention, and people like myself were afraid for that to happen, because we knew the first thing they would do is look at that Bill of Rights. We got to do something about this. We got to do something about the First Amendment, especially the Fourth Amendment. These are terrifying concepts to authoritarians today, and authoritarians rule, and they haven't been able to do that. So it's a strange situation, because we have people governing us who are supposed to be bound by that Constitution, and I don't think more than a handful. Rand Paul,
right?
Maybe, but actually believe.
But Jim Jordan, Representative Gates. I mean, there's some freedom fighters out there speaking truth. The problem with the left is they want the rule of the mob. They want the rule of the majority to take away the rights of the minority. That's why they want open borders. That's why they want to do away with the Electoral College. They want California and, California and New York to decide who's going to be president. So open the borders, give all the freebies to the immigrants, where I now think California, did you hear this? California is now granting illegals full health insurance, full health benefits.
Yeah, sure,
who's going to pay for that? The people of California. The people who are residents don't get those benefits.
Exactly.
That's how these people are nuts. They're absolutely crazy.
You have poor and working class people that have been devastated by illness because they don't have adequate health insurance. I mean, the idea and that's what really separates me from anybody else on the left, is because they won't talk about immigration. And the number one factor in this country for why wages and benefits have been lowered and eradicated is the presence of all this of immigration. They have lowered wages because they're willing to work for much cheaper, and they're exploiting that cheap labor. So the left should be all over that, but they can't, because the first concept of political correctness is white bad, non-white good, and almost all the immigrants are non-white, and they see it as a voting bloc. So it's very hard to talk to people like that, because they want to dance around that giant elephant in the room. That's why I talked about Trump and immigration. It's such an important issue to me, because this is really our last chance to do anything about it. California, if you look at the pictures and videos, I post them on social media sometime, they are that state, basically, large portions of it is in worse shape than the worst parts of South America.
I know.
It's astonishing. I mean, you have people defecating in the streets everywhere. I mean, this would have been unheard of even 20 years ago.
Can I draw a parallel for you, though? That's what the Democrats want. That's why the Democrats embrace things like UN Agenda 2030, UN Agenda 21. They want to bring our living standards down to that of the third world, so then we're all equal, right? That's the new freedom. You get to be poor. You get to live in poverty. You get to get your rights taken away, and now you're free. You can be free just like everybody in the third world. Hell, let's just open the door and let them all in. And I love those memes where you see a beautiful house. Let's take Nancy Pelosi's house, for instance. Open the front door, Nancy. You got a door? Let them in. So why can't we have a doorway as a country? Why can't we allow people in legally and shore it up so there's no more illegal migration into this country? Because if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. But they don't care. And they're so obtuse and they're so intellectually dishonest. that they can't even grapple. They can't even come up with any intelligent talking points as we run into 2020 to be able to explain to the American people what it is they actually stand for. Because nothing they stand for resonates with somebody who loves the country and the Constitution. Literally nothing. What do they have? Abortion on demand, open borders, free health care for immigrants, protected speech, protected classes. So transsexuals, child molesters, pedophiles, you name it. They're all moving to protect those types of people. Protected classes, protected speech, hate speech. It's out of control. It's so Orwellian that I didn't think it would be quite this bad, Donald, in 2019.
Well, I didn't either, but nothing's surprising. Now, now the push for reparations is very strong, and I wrote something about that in my blog recently called Reparations Deep State exclamation point. I've talked about it for a long time. Reparations are going to come, and I point out this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of all the stupid ideas on the left. And the fact that this is what, with half the country making less than $27,000 a year, a third world infrastructure that's crumbling, and Trump was the first one to even mention it since the Eisenhower administration, it hasn't been touched. We've got power grids that can be wiped out by any real terrorist should they exist. We have a fraudulent banking system that is criminal, counterfeiting. All the things that we know about this huge military-industrial complex that goes to war everywhere, but somehow can't defend our southern border. We can't put troops on the border. We have so many problems in this country. Corruption everywhere at all levels. And to think their idea, their brilliant idea is that we need to have people who were never slave owners give money to people who were never slaves. It's insane. It's logistically impossible. How are you going to determine who? What about all the people that came after slavery was ended? What about Asian Americans? What about our largest immigrant group, Hispanics? How would you even do this? But they don't care. That's identity politics. It's all about feelings and emotions and why I can't be on the left or today's left, because you can't rule with your emotions like that. You have to think. You have to have logic and reason, and the left has no logic and reason. It's their virtue signaling. This is something we need to do. It'll please. For some reason, and a lot of it's because they actually fear black people. Blacks are right about that. They are scared of them, and they think that somehow this is going to pacify them, and it won't, because you're continuing to feed this victimization mentality, and it's deadly. And if it happens, I hopefully Trump will start, because there's nobody else that's going to oppose it. I can tell you that now, that there's not going to be any other opposition. If it gets loud enough and concerted enough, and the media starts drumming it in, and Hollywood starts making movies about it, which all that will happen if they really want this to happen, then you're going to need it's somebody to offer up a voice of sanity. But I just don't have much hope at that portion, and that's why writing about the Civil War, the first Civil War, you really see how much more divided we are. Because at the time of the war between the states, the country really wasn't that divided. You had a handful of states that objected and slavery was one of the issues, but it certainly wasn't, probably not even the most important issue. But the division that happened in the country at that time was nothing compared to the division we see today. Today, you've got it across so many cross-cultural lines. When you talk about things like abortion and transgenderism, there's a huge, at least 30-40% of the public, no matter what, they're no ones. As a leftist, again, I'm never going to accept the fact that there are more than two genders. Well, that differentiates me from all those people that are trying to say there's 57 genders. So just on those issues alone, we're divided.
Do you know
let
what?
alone?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Finish that up.
No, so let alone the larger issues of what roles government should play in various, and of course things like the freedom of speech, the larger issues that this country was founded upon.
Yeah, here's the thing, and we'll leave our cup as half full here. I think there are more people on the left. I'm taking a leap here, but I do think there are more people like you that consider themselves JFK liberals, JFK Democrats. There's more people like you than the media would have us believe when we see these crazy marches and we see these crazy Antifa activities, all the Soros-backed stuff. It's manufactured consent to the degree that we're propagandized by the media as to the size and scope of this crazy lunatic left. Because again, look at the fake polls. Recall what happened in the last election when we were told Hillary had a 98% chance of winning by the mainstream media. And look at the recent Joe Biden rallies where an hour before he's supposed to arrive, there's nobody in the parking lot and a couple of old folks walking in. Yeah. Compare and contrast that to the Trump rallies. Are you looking forward to the 4th of July here? I've got a tweet here that our president sent out back there on May 7th saying, "I'm pleased to inform you the Bigs, after many years of not having any, are coming back to beautiful Mount Rushmore in South Dakota." I know there's a lot of folks that follow the activities going on with Q and the white hats that are predicting big fireworks, behind-the-scenes fireworks happening on and around July 4th. Some even believe that JFK Jr. might resurface, as you and I discussed. And so I throw that out for those who believe it. I don't, but I think it would be the story of a century if Q and JFK Jr. were somehow tied together and JFK Jr. Survived that, what I would call an assassination. Or assassination attempt. You and I discussed that in a lengthy interview. You guys should go dig up. I want to leave you with this, Donald. I want to leave the audience with this. I have a folder. I was cleaning up my desktop the other day. It's called Concerning Trump. And I opened it up, and there's only about a dozen items in here. And boy, I sure wish I had kept at it. But let me just read you these items. And I want you guys to compare and contrast these types of news headlines concerning Donald Trump versus if Hillary Clinton had been in the White House. This one's from January 24th, 2017. Trump orders media blackout at government agencies, bans use of social media, bars new EPA contracts. This one from January 24th. Trump threatens to send in the feds if Chicago doesn't fix this horrible carnage. Of course, we're talking about the murder rate in Chicago, where guns are largely outlawed, so only the bad guys have guns. And January 24th, 2017, a look at Trump's other executive orders meant to fix the incredibly cumbersome, horrible manufacturing process. He actually wants jobs to return and manufacturing to return. And this one, TransCanada responds to Trump executive order, says Keystone XL will add $3 billion to U.S. GDP. And this final one, Trump to sign executive orders restricting immigration, order Mexican border wall. That one comes to us from January 24th as well. I should have kept at it because there's so many things that this president has been trying to do to improve this nation, where Hillary would have certainly been in the Soros camp and she would have been busy burning it down. Final word from you, Donald Jeffries, and tell us where we can get the book. I know you'll probably say Amazon. Is there a more libertarian source where we can buy your book?
Yeah, I don't know if there. Well, American Free Press, who I write for regularly now. I'm a regular. Amazon actually pay me, so it's one of the few ways I have some income at this point. But they bought a bunch of copies, so you could buy it from there, through them if you want to support the good work they do. I think they're one of America's last free newspapers. Barnes and Noble. I mean, there's if you Google Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics 1776, 1963 by me, or put Don Jeffries and Ron Paul, it'll come up. There's lots of places out there, and I hope people will. It's off to a great start. It's doing really well, and I think, and to my shock, the New York Journal of Books, a real establishment source, reviewed the book and gave it a really glowing review. And I expected to be called racist because of my take on Lincoln, and the fact that I talk about all the Allied atrocities in World War II and the Nuremberg trials being unjust, which I'd love to talk about that again, because those are all important concepts. And I think if you read a book like this, you see where we got to the point we are today, and why we have to rely on somebody coming out of nowhere like this Donald Trump, and have to hope, because he really is our last hope, I think. And have to hope that something can get done, because we lost so much in all those 150 years, especially. Plus, since the end of the Civil War, so much was lost. To try to fight back is not going to be an easy task. And I hope there's not another civil war in this country, but we are so divided. And I think if you read this book and you read some of the things that happened during the first war between the states that weren't reported, because it always must be remembered that the history is written by the victors. And the average person in America hasn't won in a very long time. And the people that are writing our history and those who are promulgating it, I call them court historians. And they are just as dishonest about our history as the so-called mainstream media journalists are today about current events. They distort everything, and it's all filtered through their view, and their view is basically state-controlled. And they're trying to, they have an agenda that's clear to the people that are awake anyhow. So read the history. Look for yourself. And also, I want to mention, I wrote the foreword to John Barber's book, which just been released too. Your Mother's Not a Virgin. It's got a lot of JFK stuff in it too. So I hope people would check that out, because I'm proud to be associated with that. And again, these books you can find them everywhere. And I hope that people. I'm very, again, honored to have Ron Paul associated with my book. I was kind of shocked that he consented to do it, but it retweeted some stuff of mine on Twitter, and so it's very gratifying. I'm going to be talking to him too. I'm going to be interviewing Ron Paul in a couple weeks, I think July 3rd. And you mentioned July 4th, which is appropriate. And I think that, again, we look at something, it's amazing, regardless what you think of Trump, how is it controversial? I've actually heard him criticized for wanting to talk on July 4th. What more appropriate time for a president to talk? I think they're scared that he may be invoking some of that July 4th, and maybe, he's not with the program. And if he starts talking about, if he starts quoting from certain passages from the Declaration of Independence, the sheep aren't supposed to be hearing that. So I think that's what the so-called controversy is about there.
Yeah, you might be right. There's nothing the deep state and those aligned against us hate more than Independence Day. And, of course, life. They're very anti-life, anti-human. All right, yeah. Donald, it's always a pleasure to have you on. We'll have to get you back on. We'll talk more about the book. Maybe we can talk about 1871 and whether or not you think this country was overtaken and turned into a corporation. We can talk about the evil aligned against us, coming from the Vatican, the British royals, and how maybe Trump is trying to defuse this bomb that really destroyed our nation and took away our freedoms. There's a lot of people on YouTube telling that story and dissecting some of the Q, doing some really interesting decodes. So we'll keep our eye on Independence Day, the 4th of July. We may see some really interesting fireworks, guys. The book from Donald Jeffries is called Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963. They didn't teach you in school, with a foreword by Ron Paul. Donald, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Always happy to be here, Sean. Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. My pleasure. And guys, thank you so much. Hey, by the way, a little note. I'm fully aware of my gaffe in my interview with Jim Willey. Jim got me kind of riled up, and I mentioned Woodrow Wilson, and I meant to say Dwight Eisenhower as the one who warned us about the rise of the military and unchecked powers of the military-industrial complex. I said Woodrow Wilson, total brain fart. I knew it was Dwight Eisenhower, but my thanks to those who corrected me in the comments section. Every now and then I do make a gaffe that I don't even catch when I'm editing, but that's just the way it goes. And my thanks to all of you for tuning in. And for Real News 24/7, you guys can find us over at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. Also check out thelibertymill.com, which is essentially an aggregator of truth. It's basically the Drudge Report of truth media. Guys, thanks so much. Appreciate you. Appreciate my patrons. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
The Communist Manifesto and dozens of other books and articles that all predicted this. It's all part of their plan. First, we destroy the family, then we destroy the culture, then we destroy their art, then we destroy their music, then we destroy their children. It's all part of the plan, and it's succeeding magnificently. They are doing a very good job in destroying the world.